I guess it goes without saying, overnight parts from Japan. Welcome back to all my subscribers, and for the people that are new, thanks for being here with us today. Right Hand Drive Ron here. Got a very special guest from Missouri for the weekend. This is my little brother Zach with a Z. Today he's brought us a 2020 Civic SI Coupe. We will be installing a Prl Short Ram Intake on it, along with an HKS full catback exhaust. So we'll do a before and after on both the sounds of the engine and the exhaust for comparison's sake, and in hopes of helping people out. Stay tuned. Next up we ask, what's in the box? See here we've got our Prl Short Ram Intake for the Civic. Pretty standard. Conical filter there. Silicone intake hose. Comes with your clamps. Comes with your rubber grommet for mounting to the arm there and the filter. And also we went with the stock housing mass airflow sensor just because we're not ready to tune this car, and it was recommended that if you went with the race version to get tuning. It's a pretty nice little device there. If you can see, it's actually got the SI laser etched into the housing there, so it's a neat feature. So this is what we'll be doing for the intake. Not a hard assembly, not a hard disassembly. Stay tuned. All right, so here's the engine bay of the 2020 SI. As I mentioned, it's not a too terrible of a disassembly here, but basically got a couple of screws here for your intake tube. Going to want to remove those with Phillips head screwdriver. You got 4 8mm bolts here to take off the top portion of the intake air box. You're going to want to unplug this. This is your mass airflow sensor. Unhook it from the top of the box here. Just pull all that out of the way. That'll get us down to the filter. Once we get to the filter, we'll be able to pull that filter element out. And then there's some existing 10mm bolts that actually holds the air intake box into the car. We will take all of that out either together, or we'll do the intake track first and then the box. All right, so at this point, I've removed the 10mm bolts from the top portion of the air box. You just gotta wiggle it loose. It's got a rubber grommet underneath it that kind of locks it in place. You're gonna wanna pull this up. You can see your grommet was down there. This is where a portion of the actual intake goes down to a resonator box here. Down inside here, you'll find the bottom of the resonator box right here, which is now loose. There's a 10mm bolt back up in here that I'm touching. Loosen that, and you should be able to pull this resonator box out. At that point, you've removed all of the intake portion that's needed to be removed to install this short ram intake. All right, so I was able to get the bottom resonator portion of the intake out. When I looked down there, I thought we just had this one 10mm bolt here. You've actually got one that's somewhat difficult to get to because it's underneath the box, so I had to use a real thin ratchet wrench to get underneath there to loosen this up right here from the chassis. Once that came out, you can wiggle this, extract it from the car. What you have after everything's removed is a blank canvas, essentially. That's where all the factory intake tract was, resonator and air box, and we'll be replacing that just with the tube and what I like to call the filter on the stick. All right, so now that we've got the intake tract off along with the upper portion of the air box here, we need to go ahead and get our mass airflow sensor out because it will be going into the housing of the new Prl intake. 2 Phillips head screws, new cars, everything seems to loosen up nicely. You want to be careful with this thing. It is what controls your intake air mixture for your fuel. You do not want to damage it. You can see there's tiny little resistors there in that thing. So going to go ahead and put this in the new housing. And it comes with cap screws here. So we'll keep that with the factory box. Put this in. Make sure you use the arrow. Arrow is direction of flow. Put those screws back in. Cap screws rather. Just snug them up. You don't have to over torque them. You're just holding it in place because it's got an O-ring inside of it. So those O-rings doing the sealing. This is just keeping it in place. Next thing to do is to actually bring your intake tract over here. We're going to go ahead and slip that on close to the orientation we think that it's going to be, to where the PRL is kind of exposed there. Go ahead and put our clamps on. We're not going to tighten those because we'll make some adjustments once we actually get it in the car. And of course, the intake. And it's got a nice little PRL Motorsports on the end as well. Here's the seam where the filter comes together. I always try to keep that seam side down there, just to be a little more aesthetically pleasing. Okay, so we've got the filter on, we've got the seam side down on the way we're going to mount it into the car. I've tightened up the filter only clamp, leaving these two clamps loose here for where it bolts up to the intake portion. One thing this has, it's got a little bracket that mounts right around the radiator support, and it comes back to a single bolt here to kind of hold it so it's not just dangling on its own. I'll show you how to put that in whenever we get back to the car. Also, you've got this little mount here, which we're going to use to thread into here. And the mount that ties back to the radiator support connects right here. So this kind of gives you a little rubber oscillation point for any engine vibration. It's ready to go in. Okay, so now I'm standing over the engine bay. This is the top portion of the radiator support here. These two bolt holes right here are where you're going to mount this bracket. The kit actually came with 2 bolts to put into those holes. So once we get those installed, then we'll be able to set the intake onto the intake track and drop that bottom rubber isolator mount into the hole here. 12mm bolt, or I'm sorry, a 12mm nut on the bottom of that. So at this point, we've got the bracket mounted. Those are 10mm bolts, so about 9.8 or 10 foot-pounds rather is what the Honda book calls for most of those size bolting there. Next up is adding the pre-assembled intake to the bracket first, and then onto this plastic intake track going to the turbo inlet. So what we'll do is we'll take this bottom piece right here, we'll go ahead and put that in this hole of that bracket first. From there, we'll move over to the plastic intake portion here. Put the intake on there. The kit comes with a 12mm nut here to go on the bottom to hold that rubber isolator mount there. Put that in there and just snug it up. All right, so at this point we've got our PRL about where we'd want it for visibility's sake. Just to let everybody know we've got our intake on here. We'll go ahead and tighten up these band clamps here. Go ahead and bring our mass airflow sensor down here. Plug that back in. I'll probably take a zip tie and try to restrain this up against the factory engine harness here, just for keeping it from flopping around. And then we'll test it out. so the next portion of this install video is going to be the exhaust for the 2020 Civic SI. And this is the portion I like to call What's in the Box. So we're going to do an unboxing here of the HKS exhaust. I'm old school Honda. Back in the day, HKS, Gretty, that was the stuff to have. So I'm excited to be able to put this new HKS exhaust on the 2020 SI. You can see it's very well packaged. Lots of styrofoam, cardboard, styrofoam, cardboard. As you would expect from any quality exhaust, nice stainless steel finish. I think this one's even got the burnt anodized tip here. And HKS there. Looks like a pretty simple install. It does have a slip clamp that goes on a section of the exhaust. Your typical hanger locations will be getting rid of a lot of the muffler. And yeah, so we've got this portion, rear muffler. Got the pipe resonator right off the downpipe of the turbo there. Another portion here, which is the slip clamp portion that will go to the rear muffler section. Also comes with some decals, installation O-ring, right off the turbo downpipe, and also the gasket there for the rear section. All right, so underneath the 2020 SI, we've got the splash guard here that covers up the vast majority of the underside of the car, basically from the front bumper all the way back to the first exhaust hanger really here. We need to be able to get in here to access these 14mm bolts. There's 3 of them there to remove so that we can get this section of the exhaust off. Believe it or not, this is the only bolts on the factory exhaust. So you got 3 studs actually with the 3 nuts there. Everything else is hanger. The whole exhaust is one piece. So once we get this removed out of the way, we'll have a better view of the nuts we need to remove. So I was able to take the splash guard partially off and be able to access the 14mm nuts coming off the downpipe. There are some clips on either side up near behind the front fender wells that need to be removed to drop that down. So at this point, we're just gonna bust those 14mm nuts loose and disconnect the B-pipe portion from the downpipe. So the 14mm nuts are removed now. Now we have to get the exhaust hangers off. So you've got one there, walking back here. Got one there, 2 there, another one there, and there's one of these on each side. What I like to do, and if you've seen my previous YouTube videos, is Simple Green. It's a cleanser and somewhat of a soap, so you can spray down these rubber hangers here and it will slip right off those nipples there, and it makes things a lot easier than trying to do it without. All right, so as I mentioned, it's easier to get these exhaust hangers off with some sort of lubricant, whether it's water, WD-40. I like to use Simple Green just because it cleans at the same time. It washes away easy. I'll be using a pry bar also to help get some of these rubber mounts off of the exhaust hangers there. And I'll use a piece of wood as well, just to kind of pry against the tunnel, whatnot of the underside of the car, just because some of these takes a little force and I don't want to bend or put any indentions in to show that we've really been here. I'd like to try to keep it looking as factory as possible. So here's a quick look on what was inside the box there in regards to installation instructions. You get a nice little high power HKS muffler system decal there. This is your 3-bolt flange coming right off your turbo downpipe. This exhaust is actually 3-piece, so there's a joint that's not the slip joint that you'll use here for this soft iron gasket, which crushes and seals. Then you've got your bolting for that joint there for that soft iron gasket. Okay, so here's a side-by-side comparison of the portion coming right off the turbo downpipe. Obviously this is the new HKS. You can see the resonator diameter is actually smaller. However, the piping is larger, and you can kind of see that here. Putting a set of calipers on it. Go. So taking a look at the two different pipe sizes here, you're getting the 2 5/8 here and the 2 3/8 here. So you're gaining about a 1/4 inch of at least outer diameter of the piping. I would assume the inner, based on the thickness of the steel here, is getting the same inner diameter increase there. All right, so we've got the first portion of the exhaust put on. This is 1 of 3. I'm just gonna slip this back. Make sure you put on your gasket there right off the turbo downpipe. You also got your 14mm nuts that need to go back on. Don't tighten these up yet. Leave everything loose until you get the full exhaust on for any adjustments that may be needed. All right, next up is what I'm going to refer to as the B pipe of this installation. So we've got the A pipe done, B pipe is next, C pipe will be the actual muffler itself. So before we put this on, make sure to put on your soft iron gasket. This will crush right there in between the 2 holes on the flange and give you a nice tight seal. You can see here I've kind of got it prepped up ready to go on one of the jacks. So we will install this along with the 2 bolts that were provided with the kit. So the HKS kit asks you to utilize your factory rubber mounts for your exhaust hangers there. So we're doing that. The other 2 that are here are currently still in the car. So we'll bolt this up, or slip it up rather. Right here's the slip joint that comes with the kit. That's where the muffler section will bolt up. It'll hang from the factory locations right there. All right, so at this point, we've got all of the A, B, and C pipes mounted to the car. We've got all of the bolts and the joints loosely connected. I'm gonna go through now and start up front with the 3 nuts and tighten those up first and work my way back, making adjustments as needed. I can see right now that the tips are a little close to the bumper, and by no means do we want to melt the bumper. So we're gonna try to make some adjustments here to get those tips to roll down and give us a, ½ inch or so from the bumper there for when this thing gets heated. Okay, at this point, we've got the exhaust bolts and clamps all tightened up. Before I start up a new exhaust system, I like to go down with some isopropyl alcohol and a rag just to kind of get any finger marks or grease that's on it, because once that thing heats up, that stuff will really burn in and it's difficult to get off. There again, underside of the car, but just trying to keep things as pristine as we can. That's one thing I like to do. Once we get that done, we'll lower the car, do an exhaust sound to compare that to the before with the stock exhaust system, and be done. Hey guys, thanks for being with us today. I know little brother Zach's excited about his new exhaust and intake. If you like what you saw, please subscribe. Let Ron know how he's doing. Check me out on Instagram, that's RHD_Ron. If you're into Honda Active trucks, I've got a lot of videos on those. I also have some other cool cars coming from Japan that I'm gonna do some videos and some installs on. Thanks for joining.